bonus speaks anybody who does it in time?
Yeah, exactly.
There's not. Default. So, just to clarify with everybody in the room, the motion is you are a working class voter in a swing state constituency between a high welfare, high taxation party and a low welfare, low taxation party. This House would vote for low welfare, low taxation party. Okay? Without any further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister, Beth, to place the stands in her name here.
Okay, we here on the proposition are here today to tell you why, coming as a working class voter, it is the best option for you to vote for a low welfare, low tax party. Okay, we're going to look at the obvious advantages for low tax and low welfare. So I'll jump straight into it. Okay, low tax. The obvious thing here is you will be getting more of your check back, your paycheck back. You will have more money. When you're looking at this, you're working class. You are not in any way making like the same, well, obviously working class, you're not making the same money as anybody else who, I think you need all the money you can get back. So we're looking at this of the lower tax means that you then have more money that you can spend and put back into the economy. You have more, you can go and you can spend it on the
On that point.
no thank you, on the entertainment and leisure side of things. This creates a better kind of goods and services industry in the country. Okay.
How would it go for people who would previously not be able to buy those services but can because of welfare?
We think that the welfare is actually just we feel that the disadvantages of having low welfare are nothing compared to nothing compared to the advantages of having a low tax rate. So you are creating a better environment, and you will actually increase the revenue, the government revenue, by lowering the taxes, because this is actually a great incentive for larger multinational companies to come into Ireland, because you're looking at this does not have an actual we're taxing everybody at the same rate here. It's not so by having these larger multinational companies come in, that is not it's going to create way more, a lot more jobs, and it's going to definitely bring down unemployment, which is also that will be a problem for a working class thing. So by lowering the taxes and bringing in these multinational companies, there's less chance of job losses and things. So
On that point, do you realize that labor tax and tax on corporations are very different things?
it's still they're all still taxed, labour tax, and actually yes, I do kind of realise that. Kind of an accountant, but okay. That is why the lower tax is better. We are bringing more money in, and these taxes are lower taxes just are better for these companies. Okay, so lower welfare. Why do we think this is better? Okay, well, we think that the government spends the money that they get from these taxes, they spend it wastefully. We see this the amount of money that they actually collect and the amount of money that goes back into welfare, there's a big gap there. This money is disappearing into other places. So we think that by taking this money out, not only does it kind of enforce a little bit of responsibility among the actual workers and the people of the country to learn and educate themselves about how to not just rely on the welfare themselves. So when you look at, if you have a high welfare system, working class individuals who are going in on like minimum wage, they might get a better option by just staying on welfare, and then that's fine for them. They don't have the incentive to get up and go in and start a job. We are looking at the majority of working class individuals, they are disadvantaged educationally. They might not have as high an education as others, so they are not going to receive the same basic pay. So you look at so if you have people going in on the ground floor of a company making very little and having a high welfare system there, they will opt for the high welfare. If you take this away from them, then they are forced to go in, learn new skills, develop more, and actually build themselves up and get out of that working class. They can go into a middle, they get out of that and they create a better lives for themselves. Okay, so yeah, so we're also the welfare trust we're talking about there, and there's things for the single mothers. Where's it gone? I've lost a word, but yeah, basically all of these different allowances given to people who, these basically act as incentive for them to just stay at home, not go any further in life. Okay, so just in my last little. Yeah, so basically with lower welfare, we feel that the working class, where before with higher, they kind of missed out a bit on this money. We were saying that a lot of the money that was coming from taxes had disappeared and not been put back in, and you look at other models where there are much better health systems and education systems in these impoverished areas where that's not the case here. So the low tax, it brings in more on the bigger scale with the people have more money to spend, more money will be put back into the economy, and that money then can go and be used properly and not just to let people sit on their couches watching every day and getting paid for that. So for that, we beg you to propose this motion.
I thank the speaker for her fine words and call upon the opening speaker of opening opposition. That would be Timothy. Here.
Comrades, the drums of socialist war sound as we head to war against the bourgeoisie and their oppressive nature on our working class comrades. I have 2 points to present here against this low tax, low welfare party, and we believe that a high tax and high welfare ultimately has the best for the working class people. The crux of what we believe matters here is what is in the best interest of our voter here. I would like to make one point of rebuttal against the previous speaker before I begin. The previous speaker mentioned this idea of aspiration towards the middle class, the aspiration of the working class people to advance up from their so-called lowly station. We believe this to be highly patronising. We are proud working class people. We are proud of the graft and the work we put in to maintain a respectable lifestyle, and we have no aspirations for middle class stuff. Indeed, we believe, I come now to my first point, in the importance of social security. By a high welfare party, we will ensure that everyone, and this is the important piece, that everyone will be equal in our society. Everyone will have equal accesses to essential services and will have equal provision of the things which they need to survive in life. They will have security of income and housing when they need it. They will have equal access to health and education where they need it. We believe that the low tax, low welfare party will see a growing division between the rich and poor. The previous speaker argued the case for low tax as promoting equality. We believe this to be absolutely false. Low tax benefits only the rich. The previous speaker mentioned that a lower tax will increase the provision, will allow the working class to have greater disposable income. We believe that the growth in a disposable income under a low tax system will apply only to the rich, as working class people on low incomes will only have to continue to pay for the services they would ordinarily receive free of charge under a high welfare system. Yes.
Doesn't everyone benefit from a stronger economy?
Yes, but a stronger economy is not necessarily guaranteed under a low tax, low welfare system any more than it is under a high tax, high welfare system. Our understanding is that equality and the quality of access for all people to essential services trumps that of the individual. Indeed, we believe that inequality is perpetuated by the low tax, again because the rich are the ones who possess the greater purchasing power. The proposition claim that I return to the point about disposable income. Increasing disposable income for the working classes is all good and well, but it will have no effect because it is the rich who possess the greater purchasing power. It is they who will stimulate the.
On that point, sir.
Yes.
If you've got more rich people in the economy paying less tax, surely that brings down inflation because the upper classes generally invest, they generally save their money, so they're spending less money in the economy, which means there's less demand in the economy. Therefore, everybody across the board benefits from the lower prices that the lower inflation delivers.
That may well be. Our aim is to reduce the gap between the advantaged rich and the disadvantaged working classes. We want to ensure that everyone has equal access to everything. Under the proposed system of low tax, low welfare, the rich will continue to dominate through private enterprise, which is completely inaccessible for those on lower incomes. By a high tax, high welfare system.
On that point, sir.
No, thank you. in conclusion, we believe that by voting for a high tax, high welfare party, we will increase social security and equality for society by reducing the disparity between rich and poor, by closing that gap, by ensuring that everyone has equal access to services.
So, just before the next speaker gets up, unfortunately the timer's gone out of battery, but I have an automatic timer, so I just want to double check with people that they can hear this. Sorry, I'll turn it up later. Is that loud enough to be heard? Yeah. So, automatic time. Okay, so I thank the speaker for his fine words and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue to take the stand in the name of opening government here.
Okay, so the three main points we're bringing opening is about how the government is inherently wasteful, how we'll have a better economy for voting for this party, and how the perverse incentives of welfare. Okay, because okay, yeah, so they're going to provide these services, right? But we're doubtful, even on that metric, why the government is going to do such a great job of this, right? Because as a company, if you're inefficient with your resources, right, that means less profit. So you have a massive incentive not to be inefficient with your resources, right? But see, the government doesn't contain this incentive, right? So therefore, there's a lot more instances of doing things that aren't necessarily a good use of those resources. The resources are limited, and therefore inefficiency with those is bad. Because there's no competition, because the government has a monopoly, right, on the services it does provide. It means that if you're a private company, right, and you do a bad job, you can then your consumers can go to a different company who's providing you with a better service, right? But when you have the government is the sole provider and the only provider, right? Then there's no incentive for them to do a good job, because there's no one else they can turn to. Because there's no competition, it doesn't matter whether you provide a good service or a bad service, right? Because there's no alternative for the consumers to go to, right, in that regard, right? But why is the tax the tax comes from it's money that's taken away from the people, right, who are able to spend it, right? But give another example of about just how government spending doesn't necessarily help anyone. It's give the example of the recent economic downturn in China, right? They built airports in the middle of nowhere, right? They built vanity projects. Who did that help? That helped no one. The taxes that they took to build that could have been better spent by those individuals themselves. At least those individuals would have known how to spend money in their own interest and their own regard, right? And having a strong because the China economy is so weak, because there's so much government investment which drives down internal demand. See, better, more developed economies have more internal demand. That's helped on our side of the house when you have less taxes, which means those consumers have more money in their pockets, which means that they can spend more, right? Because equality doesn't mean because what's better than equality, right, is what's more important than equality is everyone having a good standard, even if there's some people who are unequal, right, in that, because a rising tide rises all boats, as Reagan said, right? Because now when you have less taxes, right, what does that mean? It means that companies are like, you know, like their costs of running are less. What does that mean? It means that they can invest more, right? Because these costs are less, and it means there's also the cost of hiring is less, which means that they can hire more people, right? Like, so those are two good things, especially for working class people, because those are the people most vulnerable when there's high unemployment, right? Because these are people with like less like multiple skills, right, or whatever, like things like that, right? And like because you yourself as the working class person has a bit more money, right? But we agree that, like, you know, it does mean that also people who are better off also have more money, right? But that's good because it means that like that money can be spent somewhere. Those people can buy goods and services. That demand for those goods and services has to come from somewhere, has to provide jobs, so those goods and services are created, right? And like we see, like that's a big opportunity, like for the working class jobs can be provided for them like that way, right? But like even on their metric of like we see like sometimes like you have like the unintended, like you look at tax rates does not equal tax revenue, like because of what we go through about like how the government, like because the economy is now better, right? Like having a better economy is a much bigger like determinant of what the tax revenue you get than having like the high tax rates, because high tax rates in an economy that's like, you know, very small and not very transactions going on is much less revenue than you get in thing. Like, and because of those lower taxes, it means that like you're now more competitive with the rest of the world. Like see Ireland low corporation tax. What does that mean? Loads of corporations now go to them. Like, what does that do? Well, it means that corporations that never would have been there in the first place there. So, like, that small rate of tax is a lot better than having none if they're in a different country, right? So you're getting more taxes, which you can provide on some services, like if you want to provide services, right? But like, it also means that more jobs are created because those companies are now located in your country, right? Okay, yeah. So like, why is the government wasteful? Because like you as a working class person see like the government doesn't do a good job of providing resources equally. Like we see those like who have more political power, like middle class people who have more free time, so they can like have more organisation within themselves and also vote more, so the government's more likely to listen to them. Like see the Republic of Ireland, see more child benefit, right? Those are like an obvious ploy to like for the like that is an obvious ploy, just like. That goes out to anyone. That doesn't just like provide essential services or anything like that, right? And like see the US education system, right? When you live in better areas, the public service you're provided is actually better, right, than it is in that. So like we can't always trust that these public services are going to benefit like these lower working class people. So like that's harm in itself. Okay, yeah. So like. There can be perverse incentives like of this welfare state. Like you see already, like because you get money for like as being a single mother, it means that it drives out, like it means you can't have a partner. It means that like you're financially worse off if you actually then get married to someone or have someone like that. Like that's a massive harm, obviously, if you're not able to be with the person who you want to be with. Like that's a massive harm, falls on it. Like that happens on their side, right? And also, yeah, because there are circumstances where, because especially as working class people, because you're like less advantaged and you have less like marketable skills, it means that like welfare can often pay more than the starting off job, right? Because which means it traps you in a cycle of dependency, right? And that's bad because like while that starting off job might be bad, what you get is experience and you get new skills, which means that you can get a better job in the future, right? Whereas which you can't when you're just trapped in like there's no way to upgrade when you're stuck on the welfare system, right? So like, which means that like, you know, more money, a better job in the future means you're better off, means like you're more fulfilled life. Like that's a good, obviously. Okay, yeah. So it's for these reasons, because like the government is wasteful and unequal. It's like in its resources. It's because of the better economy. It's because like the perverse incentives of the welfare state. I would beg you to propose that.
I thank the speaker for his fine words and call upon Alex to continue the case, stand the name of the opposition, and conclude the debate for the top half.
Okay then, right. So I'm going to weave my rebuttal into my argument. My three main points are the lack of viable alternative welfare strategies and the issue of public goods as opposed to private goods. My second point is what is good for the rich is not synonymous with what is good for society. And my third point is about utilitarianism, and we need to consider what is best for the society as a whole and what is best for the greatest number in society. Right, so starting off with the lack of viable alternative welfare strategies and public goods. Now there's been a false comparison made between government waste and corporate goods, and this ties in with the issue of public goods, because there are issues which are frankly due to their nature, for example like the health service, which can't be put into competitive control because they are so fundamental to people's healthcare. Remember, this is what's key. What's key in this debate is the fact that this working class voter needs to think about what's good for him and what is best for society as well. That's what's key. And what's best for this individual is that remember, he doesn't have that much disposable income. There's this sort of false argument they have more disposable income. Remember, if you're working class, you don't have that much disposable income. You're below the national average for amount of money, so you don't have that much disposable income. So how, I don't know, in their welfare system, where frankly they've also got this false comparison that welfare system is synonymous with handouts. Actually, the majority of the welfare system in Britain and in Ireland is handed out in the health service and in pensions, the key areas where you've got pensioner poverty, which is a key issue because they also can't get into work. So that's another key issue for this working class voter. He needs to consider his long-term future and the fact that pensioner poverty is a real issue for working class voters, and the fact that this voter could be in poverty under this low welfare system.
In the UK at the moment, we've got a £240 billion bill for welfare and only £140 billion welfare for NHS. That's just incorrect.
Well, yes, we have got a big bill for welfare, but the point is we don't accept the argument of the proposition that somehow free market capitalism is somehow the best system for dealing with society. What we've seen, and I think this actually comes back to your strong point that you put to Tim earlier, your POI, that you said that, why don't we have a stronger system based on the fact we can lower inflation? Well, let's remember, you're lowering inflation in the short term. Let's consider this working class voter needs to think about what's best in the long-term interest of the country. Is it to have a system of international capital where you have these fluctuations which could lead to massive downturns? And let's remember, recessions and depressions, which are caused by this international capital system, which is caused by the low taxes, are bad for working class people disproportionately because they don't have the money to back them up. The rich are fine. If things go to hell in a handcart, they're all right. They can cope with the cut in their funding. But remember, this is a working class person who doesn't have a welfare state to fall back on. He's not got that much of a disposable income. How the hell is he supposed to take care of himself if things go from bad to worse? So this idea that somehow a stronger economy is going to be caused by basing your system on international capital and on the idea that the rich is somehow going to make the country magically stronger and stable.
We know the way out of a recession is through government spending. We know that, but you cannot do that if you've been constantly borrowing money to spend. You don't have it in the first place.
I don't accept that argument. We use Keynesianism and the Keynesian argument of the fact that actually governments can bring it out of a recession. Let's look at the example of, for example, Iceland, which sped its way out of a recession. It did the borrowing, it did the high welfare, high system. And I don't accept your example that the opening government gave of this idea that somehow if we have lower corporate taxes, this is wonderful, because why should we have to base the entire system on these big businesses who are just going to threaten to go out of the country at every moment? We need to think about what's in the best interest of this working class voter. He needs to have a stable job, stable income. And if companies are threatened, I'm not going to take any more POIs. You can stand up, but I'm not going to take you. We need to consider the fact that this working class voter needs to think about his long-term interest. And frankly, is it fair that we have a system where rich corporations can hold the government to ransom and say, right, well, screw you, if you try and raise these taxes, we're just going to piss off out of the country. No, we need an alternative system. But that's irrelevant to this debate. This debate is about why we need a high tax, high welfare system. Because frankly, if this working class voter needs to know that if things go from bad to worse for him, he has something he can fall back on. He does not have the disposable income. This idea that somehow the rich are going to make everything better doesn't work. Public goods, when you have a lot of you have these issues in society which are not non-competitive, which can't just be handed over to the private sector, or else there'll be a monopolistic interest where you just have the private sector screwing the poor for all their worth. This person needs to think about what's in the interest for himself and his community and for his society. And what's in their interest is that we have stability, long-term ability to plan ahead. That's what's good for society. What's good for society is being able to plan ahead. This false comparison with China, which has its system of low taxes on the rich, let's remember. Let's have this fallacy that somehow China is this wonderful panacea of high taxes. No, it's the low tax. You want to see a good high tax country, I'll give you Sweden, I'll give you Norway, and I'll give you Denmark, I could give you Finland, the countries with the highest standard of living in the world. If you want an indictment of low tax, low welfare system, have a look at the fact that where you have the highest taxes and the highest welfare states, you also have the highest standard of living. You have low rates of crime. Why? Because when you actually take care of your citizens, this is what's key. What's best for society? When you take care of your citizens, when you deal with the issues at the heart of society, what you lead to is less crime, less unemployment, less aggravation. That's what's key. We need to think about what's in the best interest of society. And what you see is that when you have high tax, high welfare societies, they're able to take care of their individuals. They actually can plan ahead for the future. People feel secure, they feel safe, they don't feel alienated, they don't feel disenfranchised from the system. This is what's good for society, good for the government as well. Because they talk about this idea of disenfranchisement from the government. No, the reason we have disenfranchisement is because people feel alienated, people don't feel that they're able to plan ahead, they feel insecure, they feel unsafe. This is what's key. The high tax, high welfare means that people are able to plan ahead because you have long-term economic stability, because you're basing your system on firm foundations. I've told you I'm not going to take your POI, you can stand up, I'm not going to take you. Oh god. Okay, so I go to my point of utilitarianism. What is best for the majority? Come on, this entire argument's just been one flowing stream of thought. Frankly, on the point of utilitarianism, we think about what's best for society. Just because something's good for the rich does not mean it's good for the rest of society. When you think about what's the best for all of the individuals, and crucially, what's best for the working class and those who are going to be the worst off. Because frankly, when we need to think about the metrics. They talk about corporate structures. If somehow the corporate structure somehow works, no. Corporations are run by profit. Government, on the other hand, is run on metrics of what's raising living standards, what's going to improve people's standard of living, what's going to reduce environmental degradation, that sort of thing. Not what's in the interest of crony corporates and capitalism. Frankly, if we have a low tax, low price system as well, we need to think about the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, frankly, is it going to be good where we have a system where the government has to base its tax base on these ultra-rich individuals who have a disproportionate amount of power over the state? And that's the point. Utilitarianism, the argument is that everyone should have an equal say in the running of the state, because that's what's best for the state. Because if we actually want a system and a stable society and a good society, surely what we want is for individuals to feel enfranchised and feel they have an equal say. If they don't feel they have an equal say, they're not going to feel that part of society. It's going to lead to higher crime. It's going to lead to higher corruption. So yeah, what we can don't think that so I'm going to summarise. Remember, there are no viable alternative welfare strategies of public goods, and let's think about the fact that the rich can just take over everything. The second point, which is that what's good for the rich is not synonymous for what is best for society. And my third point is utilitarianism. Come on, comrades, we can do this.
As I'm speaking for the final word, sorry, Jeremy. Okay, it sounds the same here.
Well, that was a lot of words in a very short time. I hope I can speak quickly enough to respond to all your points, because there were lots of points and I thought there were problems with most of them, to be honest, but let's see if I can do this. First of all, Nordic countries, they have a sovereign oil fund, so that's the reason they can do what they do. Let's not be exporting examples that don't fit, that don't match the situation we experience here in this country, and try and say, oh, these are the same ideas, because they're not. We need to understand each specific region. We need to understand the economy, the different economies, and our economy, most importantly, to know what would be best for the blue-collar worker, which I believe is what is best for society as a whole. And what is best for society as a whole is to have an economy that's up and running, an economy that's working. But first we need to understand why that is. First of all, a high proportion of taxes, taxing 40% of nothing, to use an extreme example, is still nothing. So just because you have a high tax rate doesn't mean that you have higher profits or higher tax revenue. This was a point made earlier, but it's an important one. If we don't understand this, we don't understand why socialism is no magic solution to anything. Understanding. Go ahead, sir.
The opposition is not advocating socialism. We're advocating a system where we actually have investment within society. We actually consider what's in the best interest of society and what can have stability for the future.
Okay.
And also, frankly, on your point of
Thank you. Well, I take your point, but what you fail to see is that, unfortunately, the private sector is the most efficient way to be using resources. Unfortunately, state-run industries, state-run services, they are not the most efficient, and the state has a mandate to protect key elements of its citizens' lives, life, liberty, and property, to quote John Locke, but we fail to understand low welfare is not no welfare, but if we put too many resources in the hands of the state, what you get is a situation where the private sector is not able to make sure that these resources are allocated in the most efficient manner possible. Go ahead.
States have a legitimate interest in their people to actually make a loss on benefits. Corporations do not. What incentive would a corporation have to fight these things?
Okay, corporations. We've had them demonized. First of all, we need to understand corporations are the ones providing the jobs. Corporations are the ones bringing in investment. So what we need to understand is high tax rates. They will push corporations out of the country. No, thank you. We need to understand that outsourcing labor is nowadays one of the key problems, because corporations see it's much cheaper to open up a factory in Bangladesh than it is to open up one in the United States. We need to understand that also corporations, they care about their workers, they will care about their workers because it makes most sense for them to do so. We need to understand we need to understand what corporate loyalty is about and why it's important for employers. Corporations in recent years, they spend millions of dollars each year, the largest ones, training workers. And unfortunately, in many corporations, there's a high turnover of workers leaving the corporation and others needing to come in to replace them. So we need to understand that the corporation that keeps its workers happy, is going to be making the most profit, because it will have to spend the least amount of money to try and replace the workers that it loses or would lose otherwise. So I want to clearly emphasize what I came back to before. This is not socialism that you're advocating, granted, but unfortunately, high welfare means larger proportion of money being put in the hands of the state to run services that are unnecessary. And the problem with that is that these services are not in the hands of the state, are not being run in the most efficient manner possible. That is because privatization, and it has been empirically shown to be so in the past, tends to make the best use of resources because of the competition that is an incentive for the corporations to do so. Okay, go ahead.
We're not talking about the rights of society, we're talking about welfare, and the issue is that we've got public goods and the fact that you've got these issues which are non-competitive and can't be done by the private sector, or else they'll be the subject of monopoly power. And you can't actually address that issue.
Absolutely, or I think I have addressed that issue. The thing is, if you have all right. I think you're failing to understand that some industries and services can still be subject to state regulation. Some can still be subject to state regulation. Unfortunately, though, however, we need to have a situation where there's an incentive to work. There has to be an incentive to work. There has to be an incentive to go out and to get a job. The state should keep your house warm and provide you with food. But we need to have, and of course you might say healthcare and education, these are important things. But we can't create a situation where the state is by default in the hands of a huge proportion of resources. I mean, do you understand how the capitalist system works? I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately, it is the case that simply the free market is the best. Adam Smith's invisible hand. This is the best way for resources to be allocated, the most efficient way. State planning doesn't work well. We've seen that in East Germany. I mean, my father, he would have been waiting in line to buy bananas, whereas in West Germany, there were bananas everywhere. You could. The point is, a state-planned economy cannot necessarily provide as much in terms of services as the private sector can, because the market works in ways that the state cannot fully comprehend. A state body that would efficiently plan services and sections of the market would have to be so large, and it would need to require so much information, which is simply not feasible.
The state is not planning the entire economy. The state is handing out welfare.
The state is planning large. You're advocating high welfare systems, which involve large amounts of services. This is
last chance.
Okay. I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay. How do you then defend the? Do you really defend the idea that if we have, for example, let's talk about education, large numbers of students going into the workplace with huge amounts of debt, is that really going to be a viable future for our society, and what's best for society?
Could you restate your point, please?
Is it best? I'm taking the issue of education. Is it best for society that we've got a workforce? We've got students going out with huge amounts of debt caused by tuition fees, etc. Whatever happens in a low welfare society. Is that really what's best for society? To have a huge number of individuals who are in crippling amounts of debt?
I I think these are different issues. I mean, obviously we can talk about debt for students, but the problem is more that okay, well. All right, I'll have to end there.
No problem. Well, the chairman for his final words and call upon the member of opposition to give his stance in favour here.
Dear panel, with every minute that has passed by in this debate has become more and more about a private sector versus public sector debate. We don't think that this is the crux of this debate. What we're going to talk to you about is how I, as a working class citizen, need to be convinced of high tax, high welfare systems, how I might be convinced of such a system. So what we're going to talk about in closing opposition is how these people make their decisions and what their interests are and how this reflects on the type of systems that they're likely to follow. Before I do that, however, 3 points that we get from opening and closing government, which I find highly contentious and which I want to address first, right? So, first of all, closing government seems to have this idea that high welfare system means that the state is trying to run every possible service that they can get their hands on. Not necessarily so, right? A high welfare system might as well just mean that they're doing the things they're doing now anyway, just better, with more money, providing the same services, but in a larger extent to the same amount of people. Second of all, they seem to be living in a world where there's a sort of absolute perverse incentive for people who get welfare that they absolutely don't want to work anymore. We don't think that this is the reason why people are currently in welfare, right? The reason that they're currently in welfare is that because we're recovering from an economic crisis that has caused a terrible downfall in the amount of jobs because of a terrible amount or a downfall in the demand for goods and services. And how we're going to fix this, I will come back to later in my speech, right? Second of all, there seems to be the idea that low corporation taxes and other kinds of taxes as well might be included in the low tax system because that might attract companies. Like the fact that Ireland, for example, has those low corporation taxes doesn't only mean that a lot of companies come there and provide jobs. It also means that it's used as sort of fiscal evasion site where companies come up there and provide an empty office with actually no one working in there but still benefit from the low taxes, or effectively screwing over the government and effectively screwing over the citizens in the country. We don't think that this is necessarily in the interest of the working class. So how are these working class people going to make decisions, right? We get, I think, from the side government sort of a view that these working class citizens are only really concerned with what happens to them and only really concerned with what happens to them in the short run. We see that a lot of people actually have had a reasonable education in the UK or in Ireland or wherever, and we should not assume that they have absolutely no knowledge of how the economy works and no knowledge about, like, for example, Keynesian systems of the economy and how flows of capital, etc., have an effect on this, right? And we say even if there's a large portion of the working class who does not know this, we, for example, had brilliant speeches from opening opposition explaining how this would work, and we see that if they were running this in an election campaign, they might probably convince a lot of people that this is actually a good way of how the economy should be run. We think that there's some highly convincing arguments for these people here. So this is a way of educating them and convincing them, right? Second of all, they don't always think in the short term, they don't always think selfishly, right? They have legitimate interest in future generations. You have their kids, they see their nephews and nieces growing up perhaps, they have other family members as well, they have friends, plus they live in a social environment where they're probably more often confronted with people actually using a lot of welfare than other people might, right? First of all, they disproportionately benefit from welfare systems because the lower in the social class that you are, the more benefits you're probably going to get from that. Second of all, a lot of people who actually come into unemployment were people from the working class, were people who were living amongst people in the working class, usually not like in the grand villa neighborhoods, but more living amongst each other. So they have a far more direct connection, they have a far more sympathy and solidarity with these people, also because of the fact that they are at risk of having to use those benefits as well, and it's in their legitimate interest to actually make sure that if that happens to them as well, they have something to fall back on. I will take over.
Okay, so how do we know that the taxes are actually going to provide good services and they're not just going to be political pensions?
Yes, I'm going to talk to that in a second, right? Because what are their interests? So first of all, they have those security interests, right, which I just talked about. One of the security interests is also, and this is not been mentioned, for example, that very good welfare systems also prevent crime, because of a lot of crime actually arises from people in very poor social and economic decisions resorting to crime as an only means to making ends meet. And we see that in countries where there's a high welfare and where these economic disparities are more or less eradicated, or as far as possible, there is actually lower crime rates as well, and that it really makes neighborhoods and places a lot more safe. And we see that this is something that is easily explainable and might convince people, and it's also in their interest to do, right? So it's their personal security as well. It's also their financial security, that if they become unemployed, that they can fall back on this. And again, it's a solidarity that they know if perhaps something might happen to their children. And because it's also, for example, benefits for people who are disabled and cannot even work, so not even just in government's case that they don't want to work, it's legitimate people who also cannot work, that there's also security and solidarity for those people, right? So the second of all is economic interest, right? So on the short term, they are actually the people using benefits, so it would make sense for them to actually want benefits. First of all, because the £100 they might, for example, save on a tax stuff, they can really not spend as well on, for example, healthcare services as healthcare services provided by the government, right? If you are going to the hospital and you have to pay for those bills, it's probably going to be a lot more than what you are actually giving in extra taxes, right? The same goes for unemployment, the same goes for childcare, etc. So then opening government lives in this world where they can vote for the Chinese government in the constituency, and the Chinese government is spending things on prestige projects. But actually, most Western liberal democracies are actually quite effective in this, right? First of all, because they actually have a legitimate interest in the citizens of their country rather than private interests, because welfare things are in the end something that you're going to make a loss on, right? They're in the end something that as a state you will be paying for, and you don't necessarily always get that back in financial terms. You get that back in a relatively stable political system, and this is not something that, for example, would interest private enterprises a lot. So there's really no incentive for those private enterprises to step in and actually regulate it. Second of all, the government is actually quite successful in making these things work. Especially because they can provide these services and security way better than individuals can, and also because of the law of diminishing returns. If you give this one extra or these few extra pounds to someone who's already investing in the economy and someone who's already adding something to the economy, it's going to have a marginally less strong effect than if you're giving it to someone who otherwise wouldn't spend anything at all, or might resort to crime, or might overthrow certain social relations and make neighborhoods less safe. So overall, we see that these things also greatly help the economy at large, and which is how, for example, we can even on the long term get out of this economic crisis, how we in the long run can make the country more economically stable, which is something that opening government also wants, and that is incidentally also something that is highly convincing for these working class voters. So I've shown you how these working class voters think, I've shown you what their interests are, and I've shown you that voting this way, we can make it very likely for them, and we can convince them that these are in their interests, and that it's therefore very likely that they are going to vote for this policy and that they should. Thank you.
I thank the Speaker for his kind words. Call upon Craig to conclude the debate this item.
Okay, I've heard a lot of stuff on both sides of the House I actually don't agree with. And so I'm going to do a standard Craig here and actually argue against my side as well as your side, which I know sounds a bit odd, but anyway. Look, so a lot's been talked about a viable alternative, okay, and the utilitarian approach. Well, I take a very pragmatic approach to anything in life. So let's look at what happened under Margaret Thatcher. It was nationalised industry losing money, and so effectively we paid somebody to turn up to work, and the companies that the government were running were losing billions. So what did they do? They closed them down, and then they instigated this free market economy under Reagan-style economics, which basically was trickle-down economics, which again is wrong. Okay, the problem with trickle-down economics is it doesn't backstop it against a minimum wage, which is ultimately a living wage, and that's something that your side of the House hasn't actually touched on here. The important thing here is not to have high welfare, it's actually to have a living wage instigated as a regulation from central government, and it's the one thing that both sides have missed on so far. So the viable alternative that I'm putting to the House today is, in terms of lowering corporation tax, let's not do what we currently do. High corporation tax goes to government, we employ people in government, to then give out benefits to people who are actually working in the first place. Let's do something very different. No, let's do something different. Let's have a company that pays less tax, that pays a higher wage, so their net profit is exactly the same. And rather than their profit getting affected, what we're doing is we're cutting down on administration in central government. Okay, and that's the key thing here that we need to be doing. You need to be having a higher wage with low tax, with low benefits. Let's move on to benefits now, because this is the sort of crux of the matter. No, rather than talking about anything else. Okay, so when do benefits come into play? They come into play when people aren't earning enough money, number one, when people don't have a job, number two, when people physically can't work. There are 3 times that when benefits come into play in Britain. So, there's not a huge amount we can really do in terms of lowering the benefits that people that are on disability living allowance get. We can try, it doesn't really work. Yeah, I'll take that.
Most of the welfare, you're talking about benefits, but that's irrelevant because most of the welfare that's spent on is on the NHS and on pensions.
Okay. Welfare, in terms of the way I perceive this motion, I'm happy to go down both sides, is to do with actual benefits. If we're talking about benefits in kind, which includes the NHS and education, I'm happy to go down that point as well. Okay, but in terms of the NHS, and in terms of actual increase in taxation, you're not actually going to get a system where you get more money in the government's pocket if you increase taxation. Let's look at what happened under Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown increased the taxation level up to 50%. What did that do? It actually decreased the amount of money in government coffers by £10 billion. So we've got an exact example in the country that we're in right now, where we increased tax and we got less money. So it doesn't actually work. Okay? Yeah.
On that point, actually, if you look at what happened in serious terms, when they lowered lowered income tax, it didn't lead to a substantive rise in revenue.
Okay. So in terms of actually corporation tax versus income tax, they're 2 different tax, just like your fourth speaker on this side picked up at the beginning, and they come under completely different points of view. When you start messing around with income tax, it's one thing, okay, and when you start messing around with corporation tax, it's a completely different thing. And the way that you can maximise revenue is by hitting the middle class. They have no ability to leave the country. You hit them hard, you raise their taxes, they can't do too much else, right? The problem is that when you start going up to the 50% bracket, you're actually taking the people on the top, and they do leave. All that happened was we lost banks to Switzerland. No, multiple hedge funds moved over there. Bluecrest left. That Bluecrest had a tax bill by themselves of £3 billion. No, and they left. So we just lost £3 billion like that because of Gordon Brown. So let's do that again. We'll keep it instigated for longer and we'll lose even more money. That's what's happened. You can bring it up if you want in your speech. I'm not taking any more points now. Okay, so if I am a blue-collar worker, the one thing I want to know is, have I got a job that I can have a decent quality of life with? That's my one thing I want to know if I'm going to vote for a party. And our system here is so much better than your system. We need companies to come, we need companies to set up, we need them to pay a living wage. We have to have people in our country, right, that are trained. We have to have good infrastructure. When we have got skilled people with good infrastructure, companies will come. You combine that with low corporation tax, even when you've got a living wage, they're still going to set up here. That's what happens. Okay, and the way you keep them here is by sorting out their productivity. The big problem right now in Britain is that we have rock bottom productivity. And no one again has talked about that. No, we have to improve our productivity, and we do that through training and we do that through motivation. We do not do that through increase of benefits. All that you do when you start increasing benefits is you decrease productivity. That's what happened under the last Labour government when we sent up our welfare bill. All that happened was our productivity went down because people knew, no, they did not have to do that much at work because they had that ridiculous safety net. And it wasn't a safety net, it was just quicksand. It was quicksand, you went in it and you did not come out. No, welfare, I'm not going to take any more points. So basically all you're going to do if you start shoving up welfare is you're going to create quicksand. You want it to be a bouncy castle or a trampoline where people fall onto it and they bounce straight back into work. That's the system we want. That's having people with just enough money to heat their house and to eat food. That's the welfare bill that we need. No. In terms of the NHS and in terms of education, right? Somebody on your side has talked about the quality of education and burdening people with debt. I believe it was yourself. Now, if you actually look at the quality of education somebody receives out of one of the more expensive schools in the States, like Harvard, versus, say, the quality of medical education that we receive in this country, it's very, very different. Okay, you can be having about 6 hours of teaching in this country when you go to a medical school per week. You will get about 8 hours a day over in Harvard, and the quality of the lecturers happily take that point.
Okay, so I'm a working class voter who spent 2 years in unemployment trying to get a job desperately, but I cannot because there's no jobs. Do I still believe in your trampoline?
Okay, all right. So the only way we're going to increase jobs is by increasing the amount of companies that want to set up here, and we do that through training, we do that through infrastructure. We at the moment in this country generally do a very bad job of investing in infrastructure, right? And the only way we're going to do that is through actual stimulus spending, which is not involved in this debate. You have good infrastructure, you breed companies here, and you basically get companies coming here making jobs, so it doesn't actually, they will end up getting a job. And that is the key. Until we start making a system whereby companies want to set up because of what we're offering in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the quality of the calibre of the worker that we are offering them, we are not going to be generating more and more jobs, we're not going to be growing our economy. In terms of if we end up into a recession, if we start having ridiculously high interest tax rates, where do we go? If we have to spend our way out of that recession, where do we go? If they're already at this level, we can't go anywhere. We can't actually stop borrowing more. We've already done that. We can't tax anymore. We've already done that. So we get into a recession. We need to stimulate the economy somehow. We have to borrow money from somewhere, or we have to do something about it. Once you get into a recession with your system, you don't have any sort of fallback. I urge you to vote with outside of the House.
I thank the Speaker for his fine words and calls up no to conclude the debate for our opposition and the debate as a whole.
Thank you for the floor, dear panel. First I'm going to pose a few questions, then I'm going to talk about the debate it's actually about, which Karen talked about. So first of all, what we just heard from the summary speaker of government was a PM speech. We heard a lot of new definition, a lot of new material, and a lot of material that is not to relate to the way a working class citizen would make his or her decision. We think that's the crux of this debate, and I'm going to show you how Karen interacted with that, and a lot of government bench did it, right? But still a few questions to ask to this speaker, because they just popped up. First of all, how popular was Thatcher with the working class exactly? We don't believe that like the working class generally supported her measures and would like to vote her into parliament if she were like a swing seat constituency, right? Next, furthermore, if we're talking about international companies, we need a government, it's about the power relations between governments and multinational companies. If it's about whether or not these multinational companies can just get up and leave, that is not about wage and such. So we believe that we need a government with teeth. Secondly, what's also really important, we're not talking about investing in infrastructure. That is not welfare. We believe that indeed these are investments that might be good for the country as a whole. That falls entirely outside of the scope of this debate, and also falls entirely out of the scope of what this working class citizen would decide when he goes to vote, right? So we think that's sort of outside of what I need to discuss. So I'm going to try and clear up this debate, but I have to consent, a lot of the things don't clash exactly with what we see as the core of the debate, which sort of makes it hard to weigh up. I'm going to try anyway. First of all, I'm going to lay out the burden of proof that we believe that we had a government opposition bench, and that we've successfully fulfilled, and I'm going to do so by comparing what Karen said to basically what the rest of the debate was about, right? So we believe that there's two things that this working class voter needs to answer in order for them to vote for this party, right? Is it a benefit for me now to vote for this party? Is it a benefit for me in the future to vote for this party? We believe that in essence, that is the question that this person needs to answer, and that sort of the societal needs are only interwoven into those questions as much as they affect this particular person. It's not about we need a better system. That is not the type of question that this person generally answers. In what sense does this better system get to me? For example, the biggest example being security, right? If less people go into crime, that is a better system, but it's also a better system that directly affects this person that needs to do the voting. So that's sort of the metric by which I'm going to analyse the debate. But
do you really think that people, when you've got government-run industry that lose money hand over foot, they know, wherever you are on the spectrum, they know that's not a long-term viable option. So something has to change. They know that can't work, and they know we can't carry on doing that.
We're not talking about government-controlled industries, right? We're talking about pensions, we're talking about healthcare benefits, we're talking about disability benefits. We're not talking about so this is sort of the thing that I was referring to when I said a lot of the debates sort of not clashed with the core of the debate, right? So now I'm actually going to proceed into that. First question, benefits now. Does voting for this high-tax, high-welfare party benefit us in the short term? We say yes. There are economic benefits for we're going to split into two actors right now. First actor is the actor that is currently unemployed. It's the actor that Kerwin had a POI about. Like, do I still believe in this bouncy castle that will bounce me right back into employment? Well, we really believe that at a certain point, you are still trying because you feel like alienated by society, and we think there's still a lot of incentive for you to go out and find a job. But we think that you have lost your trust and like barely getting enough benefits to live, right? Because we think you're desperately trying and not getting it, and that's bad for you as a voter. And in that case, you would definitely vote for high benefits. We totally believe that. Second group of actors that currently do have a job, and this is also where it goes into where we go into long term, right? Because okay, in the short term, so you might not particularly care, right? First of all, tax is not gonna get to you as badly, like this £100 that he talked about, but the benefits you get are still bigger. We still believe that they get disproportionately helped by these benefits, even if they already have a job, right? So healthcare is the main point here. So like there's still a good reason for you to, but this is also where we move into long term, right? Because for people that currently have a job, they probably are looking to the long term rather than I need a job right now, whom do I vote for to get a job right now, right? So then we move into long term. Well, we think and then there's one sort of transition point. We think security is sort of a transition point between long-term and short-term, in the sense that like security affects you both now and in the future. We think that like we can't even explain the metric of how high welfare generally helps like security through making sure that people, when they need to make ends meet, don't resort to crime in order to do so, right? So we think that these people, realizing that, have a really real incentive, not only for themselves, but also the people around them, the people Karen talked about, like their relatives, their nephews, their nieces, their children, like these are the people that they also care about, and we believe, like as Karen explained, and no one else has touched upon, that the security is largely important for them. We also believe that this high welfare state, as Karen explained, provides this when no one else does. And then the second thing is like next generations, right? So when you are currently in a good position, what do you feel is necessary for the people that come after you, right? Well, we believe that these working class people, they are not always convinced that the people after them are going to be able to like suddenly not be working class, right? There's a reasonable chance that they are going to either, if these people are having companies or like whatever, that they're going to take up similar places in society. There's a chance they don't, but in the most reasonable cases they do, right? So what Karen talked about, it's like you also want your children to have benefits in the cases that they are in a similar situation as you in the future, right? These systems are not systems that we instantly break down and then instantly are built back up again. So this choice you make is not only a choice you make for the system right now, but a choice you make for the system in the future as well. The people you see around you to affect you. So, yes, go for it.
What guarantee is there that the tax revenue is going to be spent by the government well? See Spain, see Italy, see Portugal, see many examples of Western democracies.
Like, there's a difference between government expenditure as a whole and government expenditure on welfare, right? We think that especially within the situation that's most talked about right now, which like Irish and UK politics within the debate, seeing as most teams are for there, we see that right there is a functioning welfare system, and that it's not weird for the government to just simply pay more on the same welfare that they're currently paying out right now, right? Like that your healthcare benefits increase, and that the range of healthcare is still the same, whatever. Like we don't see that this point interacts with anything that we've brought, right? And that's sort of the crux of what I'm telling you here. It's really hard for me to clash what Government Bench has talked about, which Kevin interacted with, which I interacted with, because it's not talking about the core decision that this working class person has to make. That is what I summarized. I summarized, first of all, on the short term, why the working class voter, which was for a high tax, high benefit system. Then I transitioned to sort of like what affects both, what affects them in the long run, and we believe that we are the only party in this debate that have shown why this working class citizen would make the decision that they do, and they would vote high tax, high welfare. We are proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the Speaker for his kind words, and everybody thought it was a very interesting debate. So this is closed, so I can feedback now, so we'll head back towards the event room, and then you can come find me after the break tonight to get the feedback then. Alright, thanks. Also, if someone wants to turn from me. Alright.